Where I'm at today. So this is a relatively active set. It's got some breakage. It's maybe 3-4 days, a week old. Pretty dried out. Probably broken at night because it didn't turn yellow. It's still white. It's an indication it was a night break. So what this set looks like, it's got a lot of weaving. It has a nice little arch, which is where I'm going to be sitting, is right over there by my stuff. And pass-through path. And in addition to the pass-through path, let me walk you guys down here. There's track evidence going straight into the marsh. Part of it's dog, but this part is not dog. And I don't sink that far into this stuff. So that's probably an old juvenile track, but it looks like it's getting eroded because of worms, etc. So I'm going to go sit and we'll talk. Let me get back over here. And also fresh break here. So that's a nice little spike telling whoever not to sit here. So now you know where I like to sit to do my lives from. And my channel's going to change up a little bit because I'm going out for winter research probably after next weekend. It'll be all in Dogman territory. So most of my postings are going to be this winter's research. Keep that in mind. You'll be seeing a lot of Dogman evidence. Hopefully it will help people out. So today's conversation. Oh, and thank you for the comment about the cover. That's my own artwork, actually. I appreciate that. So Jen the OMA female, came onto our property in 1969. We lived in Oregon, up near Portland. And part of our property was in town, about 3 acres of it, and the rest of it was all in county. And we had, housing in front of us, farmland behind us, and orchards to either side of us. So, it was where people could see, but there was also a lot of cover. We had an oak grove stand, and we had poplar stand, and a bunch of, fruit trees and other things on the property that provided good cover, and a few, like, bigger trees, walnut trees, and cedar. We had some junipers, that sort of thing, too. So there was plenty of places she could disappear, especially under our blackberries, because always something to keep up with when you're dealing with a ranch. They kind of go crazy on you. And the Gugway didn't show up until about 1973. So her behavior before that was very blasé, innocuous. She was looking for a mate. She was going up our trees over in the oak grove and screaming at night like a murdered woman to attract a mate. And there were several individuals that came onto the property other than the Gugway and before the Gugway, including one individual who was a Skookum young man, but he was only about 6'3" at the time, maybe 6'7". He wasn't very tall, so I don't think he was very old, maybe 4 or 5 years of age. And she was already going on 10 at that point, I think. So she arrived on our property when she was 10 years old, because there's 5 years difference between she and I. I'm 5 years younger than she is, so she's still alive. She'll be 5 this year, and probably going gray like her husband, Guan. So their pelt structure, their hair structure, the hair that is like guard hair is very much like human hair. It's a little stiffer and a little shorter, of course, because it doesn't grow past a certain length. Guard hairs are typically whatever size the animal is going to be, the guard hair will grow to match. So, for instance, in the case of mink, a normal guard hair, which has a mandula, and will have that scaling across the hair, and it will have a root. Those will grow, comparative to the size of the animal. In mink, they're never more than about 3/4 of an inch long, maybe an inch, until you get into like Russian stoat, and then their guard hairs are far longer, they're like an inch and a half, inch and a quarter, inch and a half. So they're considered prize fur because of the length of the guard hair. The undercoat stays as a fluff, a down, and it does not have a mandula. They're typically clear, and they don't have a root. So without a sheath, there's no scaling. It just looks like a plain little hair, like a chicken hair, so to speak. Which is probably what's confusing science, because they're looking for primate hair in association with what they're visually seeing or think they're seeing, and they're going to be drawing a blank on that one for a while until they figure out these things actually have pelts. And that was the same for Guan. When I met him, he let me look at his hair because I asked if I could, and he had the same kind of guard hair and under hair that Jen did. So body structure. When she first arrived, she was approximately 8 feet in height. And the only reason why I understand her height was because my bedroom window was 4 feet off the ground and it was 6 feet high because we had 12-foot ceilings in that room. So the top of my window was like 10 foot. And the first time I saw her, peeking in my window at me at night, she hit one of the, 1-foot panel sections perfectly for 8 feet. So I realized, she's approximate height. And her body structure overall, she was maybe scraping 900 pounds, 880-ish when she arrived, is my guess. I wasn't able to figure out how to weigh her until I tricked her one day. My dad used to use, wasted cows or horses that nobody wanted or other animals that people wanted to dispose of for mink feed. So he had a pulley system like you have in a, packing yard for packing cows into hamburgers. That pulley system could hold, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 pounds. And one day I convinced her to come into the grinding room when everybody was off the property except me. And I got her to play on the chain with me so I could figure out what her weight was. Because I tried to ask her what her weight was, but she told me in stones what her weight was. And I didn't know what a stone's weight was. So I came up with an alternative way. When I got her on that scale on the chain for about 10 seconds, I was able to convince her to stay on it. She maxed out the scale at about 953 for her weight. But she was already approximately 9 feet tall at that time. So she was about 9.5 feet tall and probably a little heavier, maybe 970 when the Gugway showed up. And the funny thing was the neighbors that saw the Gugway thought he was a booger. They thought she was a Bigfoot, but they thought he was a booger. I don't know why they thought that or why the comment, but one of our older neighbors noticed both of them and some of the other individuals that were coming onto our property. So Jen was approximately probably 40 to 50 inches across from the shoulders. Even sitting down, she was very wide looking, kind of square, boxy looking when she was sitting down because she wasn't much taller, just head height, taller when she was sitting than she was wide. And the Gugway that arrived, he probably had maybe 200 pounds on her and probably another foot to maybe 18 inches in the shoulders. But he wasn't quite as tall as she was. I think he was about 8.5, maybe 9 feet in height. But he was far, far wider. And he looked very human in the face. And his skin was like charcoal black. He didn't have the gray skin that she had. And he again also had, black hair on his body, completely covered. The weird thing was is he had, bigger fangs. He had more pronounced canines, and he had claws instead of fingernails, which I didn't understand. I thought they would all look alike, but evidently they didn't. And this was before, I got the education of my grandmother's stories a couple of years later. So I'm still trying to figure out what is around us on the property, and trying to ask my mom and my grandmother and Uncle Long, what are these things? What's going on here? And she couldn't ever quite like completely fight him off. I think it was simply because he had more upper body mass than she did, and I think that was a losing contest for her on that end. And he more or less trapped her over in the oak grove on the opposite side of our property. It was a 10-acre field, and then we had a couple of acres that were oak grove, and that's where he held her captive. He wouldn't let her leave the area. In fact, when he first came on and assaulted her, I thought he was going to move on, but he didn't. He moved into the gully and stayed in the creek area, and evidently caught her one night when she'd gone up to scream in one of the trees for a mate. I remember hearing the fight. It was one of the nights my dad went out with a shotgun and then turned right back around and said, I'm not getting in the middle of that, once he realized what was going on. And she she ended up not being able to leave that area because he would basically sit and not let her leave. He would subdue her, drag her back, force her to stay there. And after she disappeared, because I couldn't find her for a couple of weeks, I didn't realize she was gone. I thought she'd maybe gone back to visit family, because occasionally she would go back up into the mountains where her family was from, and she would visit for a couple of days and I wouldn't see her. So it wasn't until I went looking for her, because I'd seen sign of her again, pass through. She was moving through the property, but she was being really, really low key, and I couldn't figure out why. And when I finally did find her, this freaking Gugway was sitting, 15 feet away from her down in the creek bed, and she was already pretty well emaciated and dehydrated by the time I was able to get to her. So the first thing I did is I started bringing her food and water, which kind of pissed that thing off, which I didn't care. I threw rocks at him. I figured if he was going to kill me, he was going to kill me. Otherwise, I'd just antagonize him, because he was an antagonistic, creature anyway. And their stories about the Gugway and sun-faced people are this. They will lure you into a spot, compromise you. They will offer you help, hand out their hand to you. Hey, I'll give you a hand out of the gully. Come here, come here. Everything's okay. Except when they grab you, they don't let go. They'll take you home. Or they will force you into a prisoner situation where they found you, which is what happened to Jen. And this is not uncommon in these cultures. This sort of very aboriginal behavior, very archaic behavior, is also present within these cultures and within these different species. And there are more than one species of them, and more than one race inside each species. We really know next to nothing about them. So, from what I was able to gather, the Gugways still live in family groups. They still have a social structure. They still live very indigenous-like, but their diet is very restricted. They only eat a very few things, like crawdads and roots, grass roots, and a few little, like, potatoes and some wild carrots. That was the bulk of this creature's diet. And when he was sitting there eating the crawdads, he liked to torture them. He liked to rip them apart while they were alive to eat them, which is something Jen found absolutely revolting. In her culture, food is to be respected because it is giving its life force in order for you to sustain yourself. So they always break the neck of the animal so they don't feel pain, and they don't realize they're dead. And they also pray each day in the afternoon for the things that have sustained them that day. Something the Gugway does not do. It's lacking in their culture. Or maybe it's just lacking in their overall mannerisms. The Guan, from what I understand, and the reason why she was finally able to overcome the Gugway on the property is because I took up screaming for her. It took me about 3 months of running up and down our field whenever nobody was in earshot or eyesight of me, and I would scream like she had at night to try to attract a mate for her, because I knew she would never be able to get out of that situation without help. And I knew that we couldn't help her. There was nothing that we could do. What are we going to do? Try to shoot the thing and it might not die? Not good. And let alone, how are we going to explain that to our neighbors? Not possible. So finally, a Guanche male showed up, and he scouted, he investigated. He was very good at moving, far better than I, Jen, or the Gugway. And I found out why. He was part of the Deer Hunter Society, so he was trained in deer masks. So his movement styles are a little more succinct and precise, much more like a infantryman compared to, you know, a ranger. They act much more like rangers. And his body structure, he was probably 10.5 feet tall. And I'm thinking he was probably scraping about 1,100 pounds. Because he was a good, probably 8 inches wider in the shoulder than the Gugway. And sitting down, he was still a foot taller than Jen, at least, head height. Her head shouldered out on him around this area. And overall, he was probably half again as wide as she was. So what finally occurred once Jen and Guanche made an agreement, and I was there for the proposal. I was a snotty little brat, and I snuck up on them while they were talking about what to do about the Gugway and whether or not she could marry him. Guanche hadn't been wanting to get married and actually had delayed his marriage, wasn't planning on getting married for a few more years because he was a teacher at that point, you know, teaching young juvenile men how to hunt deer and become part of the Deer Society people. So he had his thing going on and wasn't actually interested in marriage. But I convinced him, along with Jen, because she was very quiet at this point. I believe at this point she was probably suffering some sort of, you know, emotional shock from everything that had been happening to her. She was very reserved by the end of things. So they ended up marrying, and what that means is they exchanged stone hearts with each other and promised that they would never separate from each other and that they would be lifelong partners, because they marry for life. They can remarry after death, they can have more than one mate, but typically it's single mate, and it's a mate for life. And it's by choice, not, you know, genetic breeding, whatever, like a duck. It's like us, they make a choice. So after they mated in our field, which we heard, and evidently she had a great time, and so did her husband, they went over to the gully where the Guanche was, or where the Gugway was, and they beat him up. He hadn't left. I guess he thought he was going to try to do something about things. And they beat him up really good. We heard that too. And that was the night my dad actually said, no, we're not going to go investigate. We're all staying in the house tonight. And you better arm up because we're staying awake tonight, which we all did. So once they were done beating him up, they flipped him over, and I believe Guanche broke his back, stomped on him, paralyzed him from the waist down, made him crawl home. This is part of the punishment for what he'd done to Jen. This is also part of their social structure and what is actually required legally within their tribe. So he ended up getting put on a pig pole. But Jin's diet and Guan's diet, they're very similar. They eat small things. Then they're very carnivorous, very different than the Gugway's diet. And their teeth are much more like ours. They don't have expressed canines. They have fingernails, toenails. No, they don't grow a longer hair on their head, but they both have pelts like a mink. I was never close enough to the Gugway to know for sure. His hair was slightly longer than both of theirs. Their hair's like 1.5, 2 inches in length for their guard hairs. His guard hairs were probably 3, 4 inches in length, and I believe much more monkey-like, because I have seen a chimpanzee pelt in person, and his hair structure impressed me much more as a chimpanzee's. But I think he still maybe had the guard hairs underneath. I was never close enough to know for sure, though. I tried to get close to him once when he set the trap for me. But Jen, made sure I stayed away from him and called me back. Because she was afraid I was going to get, nabbed by him and probably eaten in front of her. So I stayed away from him, and wonder if that helps you guys understand a little bit about how much power these things have. And in that regard, we had a freezer unit that we'd built for our mink feed, and it was built out of railroad ties, the big ones that are used for transport ties and trestle ties. So they're the 200-pound ones that are all oil treated. Dad had, along with his father, built the structure themselves, so it was an outer wall of railroad ties that were just stacked on each other, and an inner wall also just stacked, no pinning, no nothing, just pressure held. And then 2 feet space in between was filled with sawdust to create an insulator barrier so they could keep everything at absolute zero in the freezer. If food is tainted, the animal will die from food poisoning. And that's something you don't want to have happen. So our freezer always had to be precisely maintained. So one day, this was before the Gugway showed up. This is when Jen was still able to move around the property easily. And mind you, her name, I didn't give it to her. That was her name. She told me. So one day I caught her at the back corner of our freezer on the southwest corner, to be exact. And she had just, like this easily, how small this little twig is, that's how easily she can move a railroad tie out of it. It was like she just stuck her hand in the side, wiggled her fingers in where she could get a hold of the end of the railroad tie, and she just moved it over like she was pushing a door open. She did that with 4 of them. And the reason was because the sawdust had ended up getting infested with rodents. There were rats in the wall. So she was digging in for lunch. My dad caught her that day. I got a little angry and shooed her away from the area. And I got blamed for letting her get that close to the building. And I'm like, I didn't know she was here, Dad. Sorry. So he spent like the next 2 hours with me shoving sawdust back in the wall and him in a 10-pound sledge trying to slam those freaking ties back into place. And that was something she did in, like 20, 30 seconds. She just, pulled them open. We'll just dig in here for what I want. So they're very, very strong. So don't think in any way, shape, or form that if they grab a hold of you and have ill intention that you're going to be able to survive anything. You're not. It's plain, you're not. And that's something you've got to be very, very aware of. Let me think what else I can let you know about those sorts of things. The Gugway didn't move a lot. He stayed pretty much where he was, where he came into the property. And I found out that he had come up through the creek bed, crawled up through the underbrush, because I backtracked him. And yes, I've been tracking since I was 2. The very first thing I ever tracked in my life was a Luna moth caterpillar. Because we had a whole bunch of them come in after the Columbus Day storm. And my dad was very much preservationist of wild things. So it was my job to track down all the little caterpillars and not touch them because they're deadly poisonous. Go get my dad, and we'd put them on the correct tree so they could eat, because they have to have a diet, I think, of aspartame leaves of some sort, if I remember right, which means like quaking aspen, silver-leafed aspen, stuff like that's what they would be able to thrive on here in the north, because they're actually an equatorial critter. And that was quite an experience, because you have to learn how to track the dew print on a plant in order to track a freaking caterpillar. So you have to still track their footprints. It's just you have to look for the chew evidence on the leaves and the little pairs of prints in the dew. Because once the dew is off the plants, you won't be able to track a caterpillar. So keep that in mind. Not you're ever going to have to. So my next couple of weeks is going to be very, very busy for me. I'm going to be starting up my winter research project out where the dogmen are. The majority of my posts will be about that research over this winter. And if I can find a location to do my lives out there, I might switch my lives from Friday to Saturday and just do my lives out in the middle of dogman territory, especially if I get any more reactions where I've been. So far out there, going into where my friend showed me where he'd had the fight with the dog man, and the physical evidence supposedly is still there. No one's cut it down or broke it, because it was there beginning of the spring. This spring when I went in was early May, and I got knocked at, whooped at, didn't get anything thrown at me. Startled a mother and a couple of young ones who'd been digging holes looking for food. Uh, that freaked my dog out, and we got scented at that point. It was, very skunkish, apish, humanish smelling. But supposedly it's dogmen in the area, so I want to go figure that one out. And when I got whooped at, and that was the last time I was in, I had sat, kind of introduced myself to him. When I go into an area, I don't like to immediately try to trek through things, especially if there are cryptids in the area that are, actively living there and not just passing through like this area. Uh, I sit. I will sit for a couple of hours, a couple of days, each time I go in, so that they can visually recognize me and realize that I'm not doing anything like aggressive towards them. But I still got whooped at, and an individual did come out of the brush line enough that I could see them, and it was a juvenile, probably scraping 6.5 feet in height. So I'm going to start down that same pathway and go back into the area where I was sitting and see what kind of interactions I get, and if they're still down that one causeway where I got whooped at from, that's probably where I'm going to start my investigation. So hopefully I'll be able to bring you some good footage. I'm not sure what I'm going to find, because I've never really scouted the area other than just a few walkthroughs to kind of get a feel for the trails through the area and where the marsh edges are, and where I can't make it off finger points and juts out into the marsh and I actually have to turn around, because there are a couple of those, and also where trailing gets too soggy and I'm going to need muckers to get through it, and I don't have a pair right now. So let me take a few questions, because we're at about a half-hour point. Oh, and I did do a little look-see on Melba Ketchen's new stuff. I guess she's down in Texas now, working on the border issue dogman problem, I'm guessing. Probably lots of opportunities for her to get samples currently down there because of all the hubbub that's going on. Evidently, dogmen have taken an offense to some of the stuff going on across the border, and they're now beginning to attack people, from what I understand. Which is something that actually happened to us natives about 2,500 years ago, to be honest. We'd gotten a little too big for our britches, and the various cryptid people banded together, and Native Americans went to open war with them. Uh, a lot of us didn't survive that, but the ones that did learned our live more reasonably, uh, and we're not as violent towards each other as we had been, because we had been quite violent at times. Okay, hey, Sky. Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Well, hopefully I'll be able to post these up soon. My next hurdle, uh, freaking live hours before I can. I feel like I'm jumping through a Ferris wheel too many times on that one. I think I might actually, you know, get to a point where I can put this stuff up, and my lives will be up. I'll continue to do lives, but I think I might look into other options for merchandising, outside of the advertisement system of YouTube. And I'll let you know how that goes if what I decide. Because, like I said, a lot of the stuff that I'm putting up, I can't reproduce. I find it in the field and I show it to you as it pops up. So I have to either wait for the evidence to come back around, or I have to go into an area where I can find it again, which, it's seasonal at best, and, it's a lot of legwork. So look forward to more Dogman info. Definitely, no problem, Leona. I will, this whole winter, should be nothing but Dogman. So, hopefully, you guys will enjoy that kind of content. And I'm sorry that I'm a very basic person. I'm a no frills kind of girl. Tomboy. I don't get into a lot of pomp and circumstance. I'd rather just get the information to you so that you can utilize it. And I also want to preserve, you know, the lineage of information, because I think it will be incredibly useful in the future, especially for researchers who are actually interested in the topic and want to educate themselves about these creatures, you know, in addition to going out in the field and trying to make either contact with them or, scout so that they can gain evidence of them. Lots of wildlife here today. Ponds are starting to dry up some, so everything's moving around a lot in here. A lot of turtles in this area too. So last week I was talking about on my live grandmother's Ice Age information, and that was something I noticed. Melba Ketchum finally found a at least genome species within the Bigfoot group that goes back about 15,000 years, which is awesome. That's about half the length of time of interactions that my grandmother was aware of. So, that means DNA evidence is starting to catch up, and that's good. And hopefully the puzzle can be unraveled soon, because they're way more, they're very, very, very populated, and there are many more of these things, different kinds of creatures out there that we all think are Bigfoot that are maybe related, maybe not. Now, the dogmen and bearmen that I've seen in this area, they're not as, their shoulders are not as broad. Their shoulders sloop forward more. So instead of having a very wide angular shoulder, their shoulders come in and are a little more a like a dog's or like a bear's. It seems that the scapula sets differently, though they do still walk upright. It also gives them kind of a hunch look to their backs, and I think that's just the way their shoulders are shaped. But, time will tell on that. The other is the placement of the ears. Bear person's ears sit here, and a dog person's ears sit almost on top of the head, very spike upright. Other than that, they look very similar in the face unless you know what you're looking at. And, a lot of us don't know what we're looking at, and I barely know what I'm looking at. I only have the added experience that I got introduced to some of these and told what they were by name, so I have some sort of reference. And that's thankfully beneficial for everyone, I hope. Yeah, I'm going to be trying to focus on getting some photos of the dog people in the area that I'm going into this winter. And there are a couple of locations where I might be able to get pictures of Badger Man. The one photo that I put up is actually from the Cottage Grove Lake area north of that region. And that individual will come down and sit in that particular spot pretty regularly. I just haven't done a lot of legwork to see exactly what time of year he sits there at, and when he's not there. So that's going to be, bumped into my cycle of look fors and watch out fors so I can get some. I actually want to try, because he just sits like 50 feet across the stream. I want to try to get some footage of him, sitting there across the stream. Because he sits over there just sunning himself in the afternoon. Usually in the spring and the summer, I've noticed. I don't know if he does it in the winter because I haven't been down there to goof around in that area a lot. And if he does sit during the winter, I definitely want to catch some video of him sitting there, because he'll watch you. He won't move a lot, and he doesn't get really boisterous. He just kind of sits there cross-legged, like tourist watching. It's really weird, but kind of fun at the same time because you can sit there across the river from him, eat lunch, and just look at each other. Which I've done a couple of times. That's when I finally decided to stick a camera in his face to see if he'd run off or not, and he didn't. So he's not camera shy, which is a good thing. So maybe I'll be able to catch better footage of him. And the OMA area that the old woman was in, there's a juvenile up there now that's allowing me to see him pretty regularly. So I'm going to try to figure out that one's movement patterns and see if I can catch him sitting somewhere, or her. I'm not really sure if it's male or female yet. The voice is a little masculine sounding, so I'm assuming it's male. I won't know until I actually get more visual. The two visuals that I do have is like the one picture I showed, they're camouflage. That's the juvenile that's been, knocking and speaking words and letting me see the footprints of. So I'm assuming that one's going to let me get closer here sometime soon. At which point I will definitely catch video of them, because I want to be able to share those sorts of things so that people understand how close you can safely get. It's about 40 feet on average before they will start getting, a little either shy and want to move, or they'll growl at you, or they might throw something at you. But if if they're sitting someplace that they're comfortable with, you can slowly kind of sit and wait. And you're going to have to do it for several days at a time, let them get used to you, and then you move a little closer until you can get within, 15 feet or so. That seems to be about the maximum comfort distance until they decide they want to come closer to you. So 15, 20 feet, I can get some probably pretty decent footage or pictures at that point. But it takes time. With the exception of the dogmen, they seem to like get up on you quickly, and they don't really seem to care what you think about it. But the others, they're far shyer. So you've got to take some time to let them get used to you, so you can get close. Let me go back down through some questions. Okay, tracking a caterpillar. That's way too cool. Yeah, and I got really lucky. We got to see two of them hatch out. We'd gone to the coast, we'd gotten mink feed, and we were coming back in our 5-ton truck, and we pull in to offload, and there's one that was already unfurling its leaves and almost dried out and ready to fly, and the other one was still in chrysalis, still trying to get out. And my dad's, we sat the next 2 hours waiting for them both to dry their wings out and be able to fly away. And it was a really neat experience. He kept the headlights on. just so we could see them, because we didn't have an external light on that building. It had burned out, and Dad hadn't replaced the bulb yet. It was burned out a couple days before that. But we knew they were there. The chrysalis were hanging, and it was just a matter of time before they'd, be able to birth out. Yeah, I'd really, really want to give them out the lives. They're real rough. I'm sorry. I'm kind of a raw, bare bones person, so you might have to put up with some silliness in them. But, the information hopefully will be useful. And yeah, my main goal is just trying to keep this information flowing to you, and give you guys some heads up on what you might find, or how to look for stuff, and sometimes how easy it is to find things, and other times it's going to be far more difficult. But if you've got somebody walking you through the process and showing you firsthand what's there, it makes it way easier for a researcher to be able to then find the same stuff, understand what it is, and then be able to go forward from there. And another part of this, I really believe that without public interest in this topic, and without people actually doing their own legwork, I don't think science is going to be able to resolve this, because they've got too many, like, little boxes to check, as it were. If it looks like a primate, it must have primate hair. That's one. If it walks like a primate, it must have the diet of a primate, or etc. So there's a lot of box checking going on in the scientific world, unfortunately. And I think that actually is keeping them from finding accurate information, because these things they're not normal. When I say they're like a weird ass platypus, you know, they are. They're that same sort of anomalous genetic conglomeration as stop. Whereas the platypus has a poison hook, lays an egg, has a bill, and is a mammal. Marsupial has a pouch. These things kind of fit in that same Darwin grab bag of genetics. And I think that's where science and biology is going to have a fall point, because they're used to everything fitting nicely in a category. And these don't fit nicely in a category, unfortunately. Okay. So Jay, do you see them when you go outside your home? I don't see them. Uh, they'll either make themselves known by tapping, or vocalizations, like the owl hooting, or the trading. They'll trade in my yard, or occasionally they'll say a word. Like, that's how I understand that they're there. That, and there's the pass through. Finding little broken sticks in the backyard that aren't chew sticks, and finding trade items in the yard that aren't mine, and having trade items picked up that wouldn't be picked up like by any other animal. So no, if I had a camera that filmed at night, I probably could get footage of them, because they do come in pretty close. But I haven't gotten anything like that from them, other than some eye shine, which is pretty easy to get, as long as they're looking at you. Leona, I saw a video from BC, Canada, where the being looked like it was wearing a mask or face paint. Do you know anything about that? Yes. They wear both masks and face paint. And it's ceremonial typically, or part of their societies. Guan, my adopted cryptid father, and yeah, I had real human parents. Uh, he talked about being part of the Deer Society when he was younger, and that he'd become a teacher, meaning he was teaching other young men how to hunt and do things a little differently than the rest of the group, because there are certain spiritual practices also involved in the Deer Society. So they wear a deer skull as a mask, and I've got two pictures up of individuals with deer masks, or deer skull masks. One in the Yaran territory and one in the old woman's territory, which was a OMA family. So that's kind of a common thing. And then the dog man that I was around down in Douglas County for 7 months, after he killed the bear, I found him during the day, and I have one picture of him I took with my phone because I crawled up the hillside to look at him. I thought he was a mask because he was sitting there so quietly and just up underneath the bushes. And there'd been a lot of people in and out of that property, so I figured it might have been somebody's art project left behind, and I hadn't noticed it before. So I crawled up the hillside to try to grab what I thought was a really cool looking Native American mask. Turned out it was a dog man sitting there wearing face paint. I wasn't sure if it might be, tone coloring of the skin, but thinking about it at night, he didn't have that coloration. And when I saw him, as if he was trying to Predator from the Predator movie. It was very Predator-esque when I came up on him. And I'm sorry, evidently full bars here, but evidently it's getting glitchy, or maybe my phone's having issues. Sorry. Hopefully it's not translating bad on your side. Uh, Leona, can I try to find the video and send you the link if you like? Yes, please. I'd be very interested. I'm always interested in either what other people have discovered, like visually of them, like the creature. Uh, that I've seen pictures from, where was it? Louisiana or Tennessee area. What they call the skunk ape looked very similar to the Seven Shoots creature, except it seemed to have more of a proboscis-like nose instead of a snout, but it still had that snout look to it, so I don't know if it's just an extra fleshy bit. But those are considered, pioneers called them boogers. Uh, and I don't know quite exactly why they called them boogers. Maybe it's a thing from the old country, because I think the Irish called the Moor people boogers, if I remember right. So the names, some of the names of these things historically might come from, pioneers and their original countries and what they understood of their cryptids. If you see a similar thing or a similar acting thing in a completely new country, you're still going to give it the same old name you've always given it because that's what you're familiar with. And you may not know the name from the regional area because it may not be anything that you know. Native Americans didn't go around shaking hands and saying, "Hey, my cousin's a Bigfoot, and this is what they look like." We were at odds with each other too much for that sort of thing to happen. Hey, Mary. Yes, Melva says the same thing you do. They don't, that they are a tribe of people, just not like us. Yep, exactly. And they are many different tribes of them. Yep, very true. My grandmother estimated somewhere between 200 and 300 tribes uh, because of the lore that she had. And I'm not, I'm familiar with like maybe 4 of their tribes ish. So I'm a drop in the bucket and nothing, for knowledge. Yeah, no problem, Mary. Part of the main reason I'm doing this is because I wanted to preserve my grandmother's lore about them and her knowledge about them and the ancestral knowledge that came down from Owaissa. Because, that we walked away from our tribe just to preserve this knowledge, and there had to have been a very good reason for a person to make that kind of a choice and a decision. It had to have been important enough to her to completely make her shift out of her own culture and away from her culture just to preserve the knowledge, because she was afraid it would be lost within the native culture. She was afraid that too many of us would be killed off, or that too many of us would be robbed of our lore, which has happened. So I think she made the right decision to preserve the lore the way she did, and require all of us descendants to go through a very thorough training to maintain the knowledge. Ooh, I haven't thought about doing a tracking class. That's a good idea, Mary. And maybe I can do it the way I had been shown. Because part of what we would do when I'm learning to track, and the reason why you learn, whether or not something's broken at night because it's white or yellow, is because plants oxidize when they're exposed. Inner bark and tissue oxidizes when it's exposed to air, and it also will burn in the sun. So if something is broken at night, it will dry out, but the inner flesh will remain white. The other is tracking how long it takes for something to dry out. Like that big stick that's broken over here. Uh, I would, in order to understand it thoroughly, I would break a stick the same size, and then at the same approximate time, like I believe that one was broken at night. In fact, let's go examine that, because I can show you a little bit about that sort of thing. Let me turn the camera around. So this break was done at night. And the reason why I know it was done at night is because it did not brown out in the sun. So it didn't oxidize dark. There's no moisture left in it. So a stick this size, and then you peel down, and you want to get a good idea how long it's been. And you feel where the moisture still is. So that was broken approximately 2 days ago. Because the moisture level for approximately 72 hours on a stick this size will stay very near the break, and it will retain its moisture. Now that I've pulled this back, the moisture will escape from this area and it will dry out in the next couple of days. So part of tracking is you replicate the damage. You same damage to it, and then you see how long it takes to dry out. You wait to see what the thing does, and what the particular material does. You can do the same with any kind of food item that you find. You can figure out how it was collected or when it was collected by seeing how long it takes for it to fall apart, rot, dry out, etc. So those are all things that you learn when you're starting to track, because if you're chasing an animal, for instance, and their break evidence is a day ahead of you, it's going to take you 2 days, 3 days before you can actually catch up to that animal and have it for dinner. So learning the techniques of time in relation to wilt, and that's the other is that branch is not wilted yet, although the leaves on it are still green and viable. So again, that plant wasn't broken maybe more than 48 hours ago at the max, because the moisture retention is still good. So it's things like that that you pay attention to. Now, if this was completely wilted and browned out, you're looking at 72 plus hours, maybe 90 some odd hours for a plant to completely wilt out, unless it's really hot. If it's hot, then your wilt's going to be sooner. And it's those kinds of things that help you learn how far back the pass-through is, for instance, how long it's been since the creature moved through the area. So I can safely say that something broke that within the last 48 hours and was probably here. Either last night or the night before. Most likely the night before or the morning before. And in fact, I might take you up on that idea about tracking evidence, and I can maybe do that while I'm out doing the dogman thing, because there'll be probably quite a few things I haven't seen yet in that area. So it might give me a chance to show you a few things like that. Well, thank you, Leona. That's exactly the way I want it to present. I want this to be kind of a discussion between friends, because we have to be friendly with each other in order to be able to achieve anything. So I'm glad that you like my presentation. I'm glad it's coming across well, because I feel it's better than having somebody tell you and look down on you. It's better to be included for everybody, because without inclusion we don't get a chance to share anything. It's always an argument over who's top dog if you can't share things with each other openly. Hey Ben, being near water is key. Yes, water is a big factor with these guys. Greater primates typically don't drink water, like gorillas don't drink water. They get all of their moisture out of the plants that they eat, and they're not omnivorous. Gorillas have a very select plant diet. So these guys are far more like us. They have to remain hydrated. So rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, those are going to be some pretty heavy points where you're typically going to always find them or find some evidence of them. And that's very common. The other place you're going to almost always find evidence is up in the mountains and in incredibly obnoxious box canyons. Things that, 45-degree angle, you crawl down in it, you better have a rope to get out because you're going to be sliding your back down in it. So you got to be to in some instances in order to get into the areas where they actually go. And going into those areas, you'll find that they slip and slide too. That's how I came across the ladder. And that was while I was trying to track a bunch of Guan up in Washington. And that group had problems. The young ones were having problems sliding down the ravine edge. So the elders put in a pegged system of pinned sticks, big ones, 3-4 inches in diameter, 10 feet long, and then pegged into the ground with like 15 to 18 inch, 1 inch around, you know, spikes on both sides. So they were securing it to make sure it wasn't going to go anywhere, and then placed every 4 feet up the hillside. So it's a big ladder. You just stand on one point and grab the next one and climb up, stand on, climb up. So they're not always as stable on their feet as we might think that they are, especially the young ones. They do have a tendency to be a little clumsy sometimes. Yes, finding the more hostile Gugway around waterways, that's a very distinct possibility. And also running into like bear people or badger people because they also like waterways. Not just the OMA and Guan like waterways. And the Yaren, they live right on a waterway, most of them. They all like the river. They go up and down the Willamette, all their family groups all up and down the Willamette and up on the tributaries dumping into the Willamette. So they're literally all over this valley. It just, we can play hide and go seek from each other, so can they. And they do a very good job of it. But the one thing is with the Gugway, they always defecate where they eat. So you're always going to find, the droppings with crawfish shells in them in a stream. So that way you can identify specifically where they eat, and then you can come at that area from another angle, or you can pull out of the area because you may not want to be there. There is only one Gugway family that I've been able to find locally in this area, and I have heard of one other one from a fisherman that I talked to a couple of years ago, and that's up, where did he say he was? He's outside of Lieberg. So that's not even in this area. but he found the same sort of defecation across a stream, and he said, I got to looking at it, I figured out it wasn't bear, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And I said, was it all crawfish shells? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, that was a Gugway. And you were dealing with some sort of a cryptid. So that's always going to be in their area. And that, where I took the pictures of the droppings in the water, they do in spring come down more, even more than they do in the fall, to that area to eat. And occasionally I will get growled at from the bushes down there at really close proximity, 10-15 feet. And no, it's not a bear. I've never found any bear droppings there. And I've been down in that area for a couple of years now, 4 or 5. And the other cryptid researcher that had been in this area, that was also evidently one of his research sites. At least I'd see him come through when I was there. So I'm assuming he was doing the same thing I was doing. But he didn't have much luck because he didn't, I don't think, understand what he was looking at. But I do want to get some footage of that group. It's just I'm trying to figure out how to do that safely, because they do kind of creep up on me a little too much. They get a little too friendly, and I know their behavior patterns are not the best towards humans. And I have found one trap down there that was the bow trap in the ground, which is something I destroyed, and I went in and told them they shouldn't be doing that, and I tell the Guan Society about them and have them deal with them, because yes, the Guanche do kind of act like a police force for them to a degree, kind of the same function as dog soldiers were, meaning that, you know, they would come in and resolve issues, and if the issue couldn't be resolved, then a decision would be made, and that decision would be carried out, whatever that meant. Yeah, the Gugway eat a lot of crawfish, so they definitely stay near smaller streams. It seems like they like streams that are about 10-15 feet wide at a max, but they prefer even smaller than that, 4 or 5 foot across, 6 foot across, little creeks, especially where they're shallow and have a lot of crawdad. So you'll see their evidence far more prevalently in areas like that. Hey, Bad Pup. Which Bigfoot and or cryptids are more neutral to humans, and which ones are more aggressive towards humans? So the sun-faced people and the Gugway, and it appears dogmen, have a bit more of aggression towards us than, say, the OMA, Guan, Yeren, Skakam, and even the Ishka, the Janoskwa, although some of them can be kind of bad acting. But most of the ones that sport fingernails and toenails seem to get along with us pretty good and ignore us for the most part. I haven't seen a whole lot of information about anybody ever sighting a bear man or a badger man or a mole man, so I'm assuming they stay out of the way of everybody, and they really don't seem to be too aggressive. I mean, I've been hollered at by the bearmen, and they do speak. I didn't realize they had language until I got the answer, no, I don't want to trade with you. And that was verbally, no. That's when I turned around and took a picture of the blind, because it confirmed that, yes, what the old man had told me about their living area up between those trees is true. And so I don't think there's been very many sightings of those kinds of creatures, aggressive or non-aggressive. And I think they're, you know, left over a really ancient period in time. I don't think they're a modern creature at all. In fact, according to my grandmother's stories, the mole people, bear people, badger people, and the giants that could walk on lava, and some of the smaller creatures like the, what do they call them? The little people that were so cannibalistic towards us. They came from a far more ancient period than we came from, according to her myths and Uncle Long's myths. So I'm thinking they go back probably into prehistoric times. You know, that's true, but there are quite a few trackers that could actually follow what I do, because basically all I'm doing is just tracking a human being. And there is a little bit of difference in how you track a human being as compared to how you track an animal. One, you have to keep in mind that the human being is going to evade you, unlike the kinds of evasions that a normal animal will do. You know, an animal will run away from you, and it might either go home, or it will go to an area where it believes it's safe from you. Uh, but when you're tracking a cryptid, remember, they might turn around and try to track you. So they're not going to have the same run and hide behavior. They will startle. You know, the young ones will run from you. But once they realize that you're not a real threat, they become curious, and all of a sudden you become the tracked individual. So that's something to keep in mind when you're out in the field. You're probably going to be getting watched and tracked by these things just as much as you're trying to find them and track them. Yeah, you're welcome, Starseed. I'm glad that you like the information. Hey, Bad Pup. It's really the Lost Ways fully used to have much more knowledge about self-preservation when they lived off the land, and more knowledge of forest cryptids too. Yes, very true. We're going to need yes, we are going to need those again. In fact, I was just commenting today. She's telling me how her 10-year-old daughter is doing socially, and I thought it was really bizarre because, you know, she's worried about her 10-year-old kid in school. And my father at age 10, though he went to school, uh, he also ran a 50-mile long trap line by himself at age 10. Something our children today don't do. Oh, that's a really loud sounding vehicle. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm in the Willamette Valley. You guys are over in Eastern Oregon, eh? That's where I did my turnout, was in Eastern Oregon. True, Bad Pup. Life is all about sharing. Can you confirm Bigfoot in don't like infrared, and why they take some cams down? Yeah, I'll tell you my experience. So I got a trail camera, you know, a deer camera, and I'd found a juvenile that was like to nap under a pair of logs, so I mounted that thing looking right down into it. Figured I'd get some good footage of him laying there. Well, he watched me put it in, so he ripped it down about 20 minutes after I put it up. So there's a possibility that they'll simply take him down because they realize they're cameras. And the other is they have very good eyesight. Their eyesight, like Jen could see at night without a light, like a flashlight, and she could see very well, too well, in fact. It was pretty amazing how well she could see. Like, I could have her pick up fine objects at night that you couldn't see, but she could see them and she'd pick them right up. So I know that they must see probably more colors, and they probably see into light spectrums that we don't see into. I think their eyes are far better adapted, not only to the dark, but also into looking at certain kinds of energy. And you know, when you're dealing with any kind of technology, you're dealing with a form of energy, actually. So I have a feeling they can see that sort of thing. And the other experience I had was with a juvenile, again up in Washington, and I had used the same trail camera in a different location, miles away from the other one. you know, and I got a very similar reaction, but a peculiar reaction. So I'd mounted the camera at a location where a friend was having problems with one backyard, and there was clear sit evidence and what have you. The individual wanted to catch the Bigfoot coming into the yard because they wanted the information about them. They were actually an animal trainer and they were very curious about what the critter was that was coming to their backyard. So, and the individual worked with big cats, you know, cougars and panthers and stuff like that. So I went over and I set up the cameras for her. And the juvenile Bigfoot we were trying to get footage of realized the camera was there. I think they actually saw either the camera, because I put it in where they weren't there, and I knew they weren't there. So they either had to have seen the light energy coming off of the activation beam, you know, for movement, or they had to have been able to recognize the device. So what the footage I got was eye shine through the fence, you know, looking through the crack of the fence at the camera, and then it dropped its kitten down in the yard. It had stolen one of the neighbor's cats, kittens, a few weeks before. Several kittens went missing, and actually they were still alive. They were just being kept as pets by the juvenile Bigfoot. So he dropped a kitten over the fence and let me film the kitten. And, you know, his eye shine, or her eye shine, was still watching through the fence. I don't know if I still have that footage. I might still have that disc. I don't know. I hope I do. It was very funny. So they do have a presence of mind to understand, you know, what a camera is, what technology is. They're not stupid. They're not like animals. They're not like gorillas. But these days, gorillas will, you know, want to see what's on your phone and play with, you know, Apple Pads themselves. There in this area there is a little bit of hierarchy going on, and it seems like in this particular area the Skookum have a lot to do with transporting goods, so they are kind of given carte blanche of movement. They can pretty much go anywhere and do so. They seem to be more heavily traveled than the other groups. And in addition, the Ishka, which is their family groups are in the coastal range here, and the Guanch actually act kind of like not only guards for bringing things from the coast and taking things from here to the coast, because they do have a trade route, maybe 60 miles, that I've been able to find. It runs a ridge line out to the coast, and I haven't had the ability to walk the entire thing because it's not all on federal land, some of it's on private property. But it very definitely looks like it is a very utilized thoroughfare, a regular trade route, kind of like we did when indigenous people were living here in natural way. So they still live in those same kinds of tribal systems and still utilize, in large part, a lot of our old trail systems. Because the trail system I found was something I already knew about. I just didn't realize it was still being utilized by anybody. So there's that to keep in mind. You know, if you've got any old trade routes, native trail system or trade routes, check along those areas first, because you might still have some indigenous populations still utilizing those routes. And in fact, the Appalachia Trail system was actually a trade route at one point in time. And that's probably why you got so many problems in that particular trail system. You know, it might be that they are thinking you're in the wrong area and doing the wrong business. And I have noticed that the dogmen kind of get controlled or uh, dissuaded from being too obnoxious by both the Skookum and the Guanch in this area. And when I goofed up around the Yaren, I actually had to go up to a Guanch group to get protection, so I could still stay in the area and not have an issue with them. And it, it took a year of me being shunned before the urine let me back in their area. And I still have to be on my best behavior. But, what what I had to do, I had to do. Simply because there was a dangerous situation for them. Their woodland trails look a lot like our trails. You might think that they are a deer trail, and in fact, you can usually find their trails by following deer trails because typically they will either be right next to the deer trail, or you'll find tracks on the deer trail, or you will find crossover trails, uh, especially in bottle points or choke points. You'll end up finding uh, Bigfoot evidence and their trail systems. If you're going back into a bed system, you're going to find what looks like a rabbit trail, just single file, about 6 inches wide. Normally, their paths will average about 8 to maybe a foot in width, but they pretty well look like just a normal human walking trail, just slightly narrower until you get into the bed system area. And then it gets really narrow, and that can become dangerous because they don't like you messing around with their young, and they don't like you in their bed systems without permission. So be careful if you're following a really narrow trail. You might get more than you bargained for. Okay. Uh, yes and no on the do they avoid creating well-used trails. Hiking and forest trails are often wonder if their unusual pattern of hiking is discernible. If they can utilize our trails, they will. Hey, Shiloh. Uh, and they do. Any hiking trail that you go on, there's a good likelihood that something's crossed over it that's a cryptid or has walked down it. Um, they also have a tendency to favor utilizing logs to walk across or rock escarpments, anything that will hide their tracks. So they do intentionally hide their tracks for a good portion of things. So when you find a track, it's usually just one, sometimes two, and it will be, a mistake track where, it was too soft ground, they didn't realize it. Um, and they like to use hard pack ground, especially in this area. So tracking them on hard pack ground gets entertaining. So when you're tracking in hard pack ground, you have to look either for like scuff marks, which means you have enough of displacement of the soil to suggest that something's passed through, but there's no print. It's just a disturbance in the dirt. And the other thing you will find are like partial prints where they step off into the grass by accident or into a slight bit of a soft spot. So you'll get like a toe print or the side of a foot or a heel or, some portion of the foot or maybe a rump spot or a hand print or a couple of knuckles. But you're not going to have a full track. So when I'm out doing my tracking, I'll start showing you guys some of those partials and where you find them, because that's actually a lot of how I do my tracking. So I look for the very minuscule, and then I look for the snap sticks, breaks in plant foliage, and the blinds, and that tells me I'm in an active area, along with the kana and kanji, what they're talking about. Also clusion that they're there. But to track them, you really have to get pretty down and dirty with your tracking, because they will intentionally hide their tracks. They do. It's habitual. There are a few places that I know of where they'll walk in sand. There are a couple of places where I know of where they'll mess around on a clay bed, and I'll get the tracks there. And I know a couple of muddy marshes where I can get some track evidence. But for the most part in this valley, you're not going to find it because it's all hard packed clay. So you got to get really inventive. Okay. Hey, Justin. I hear you list to speak on their eyes. I know they see things almost like a person doing mushrooms. Uh, you mean color-wise? Well, here's the weird thing. A normal human being sees, what, 380 colors? I have been tested, and I see 735 colors. So I'm supposedly a half-breed. Now, if that's any indication of what their eyes are, then you could assume they see probably 1,400 colors. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily them having anything odd going on mentally, mushroom-wise, so to speak. But uh, they're going to have a perception, a far greater perception of color delineation than we have. And people always make fun of me because I sit around in green tones and mute tones, browns, grays, greens. The reason is you have to. In order for them to not notice you, you actually kind of have to act like you're a bush. And you have to sit still. Because otherwise they'll pick you out like that. And, you know, you can't have that happen and be able to get close to them. So part of what I do is I sit in inconspicuous ways, and I position myself in either shadows or in shade or in some way like they do, so that it's going to be a happen chance. And the other is they actually kind of judge you on how well you can conceal yourself. Like if you can startle them, you might scare the heck out of a juvenile. You might run away for half a mile or so. But that juvenile after that is going to be very interested in how the heck you did that. And they will start watching you pretty regularly. So that's a tactic I actually use to try to, get a little closer to some of the younger ones. And that's actually done intentionally. That's where, I will want to sit in a place like this, especially if I know there's a juvenile coming through, because if I can get them used to me, at least they're approximately my same size, and I'm not going to be too terrified about being that close to them, and they're probably not going to be very aggressive, because they don't have young to protect. They're just seeing me as another kid on the block. Hey kid, what you doing? So, keep that in mind too. You might be able to utilize their own kind of behavior patterns to get them to let you close. The layer a spectrum of light perceived. Yeah, you got a point there, Justin. That's very true. Has your uncle mentioned being able to increase his vibration and sleep inside of trees? No, but here's a funny story. Genghis Khan supposedly was able to hide inside of trees because, as witnesses claimed, he would hum or sing and then he could walk into the tree and hide. How true that is, it's actually an old family story, and there are a few other stories from Mongolia about that sort of thing. So it's a possibility. And he actually practiced Tengrism, which is a form of ancient Buddhism. Very similar to what Uncle On practiced. Hey, Lauren. I'm glad you made it. Ooh, they, after disasters, like when we had the fire here a few years ago, big bad forest fires all over the place, this town was like smoke covered for 10, 12 days. I noticed that they went into a kind of an emergency response. The Yaren in that particular area of forest went into kind of an emergency response. They were a few miles further back away from the fire, but their group and some of the other groups I noticed were going into the fire. Adults were going into the fire and they were bringing children out and survivors. So they actually go into the fires and pull out their own kind, pull out the children. And that's how I think why there's so many mixed groups in this area, because there have been a few fires and disasters over the years. that may have eliminated, family groups, and there may only be orphan survivors, and they will take in the young and they will teach them. And in fact, up north of here, there is a sun-faced person who is a medicine person for an OMA family, and his family had been killed. His family had died, and he was the only survivor, and the OMA had found him, so I'm assuming it was a forest fire. And they took him in when he was very young, and as he said, taught me a better way. If that's any indication, then maybe the sun-based people don't have to be cannibals. Maybe they can be taught differently. Maybe they can update and modernize like we can, because there are lots of cannibals in the world that have left that behind. There are still a few tribes that are human tribes that still practice that sort of thing. So there's hope for that. Oh yes, actually up in I think it's Fort Lewis. There are a pair up there they call the couple, and they like to bother one particular shack area, but they never hurt anybody. They just kind of walk along the area, and people notice them a lot in that area. And a lot of bases, a lot of military bases actually have, like, especially in their exercise areas or fire zones, that sort of thing. It's not uncommon to have interactions with cryptids. In fact, the military men are often told to not talk about it, and with threat of you'll be the heck out of the military, you'll never have a job again, kind of thing. So military guys don't say a lot about them, but it's obvious there's a lot of interactions and activity in and around military bases. Uh, I knew that for a fact from Paso Robles. My dad said there were quite a few in that area when he was down at that base before he shipped out to the South Pacific. And he said the same thing about the Olympia area and Port Louis. They don't migrate. Sorry, bad pup. They don't migrate. They don't migrate anywhere. Uh, they're not a group. All of these creatures habitually live in the same territories. Like the bear woman here. Yeah, maybe she'll go area, but her and her family have been stable in this area for at least 30, 40 years that I'm aware of. Because the individual that told me about that particular family group of critters, and mind you, I didn't even know bear people still existed until, I was introduced to the guy, and he took me to where the tree stand is that they sleep in, and he claimed that his grandfather was aware of them and that they'd always been here, and that when they were the pioneer land that they had been granted had bear people on it, so they learned to live next to them. And when they finally sold the property in modern times, they didn't disclose to anybody what was going on or what was there, because there's no legal way to disclose it. What are you going to say? You got bear people living in the tree next to your house? Nobody's going to believe you, for one, and if they do, they're probably going to try to kill them. And that was one of his concerns, actually. He wanted to make sure that I understood they were not vicious or angry or violent towards his family in any way, and never had been. And, that's why I feel completely comfortable about sitting here. And the Dogman territory, that's been a stable area at least for the last 20 years, so I don't think they move anywhere. I know that the OMA, the Yeren, the Gugway, the Guan, all of them, they all stay in their own regions. They don't move. It's sort of like tribes living next to tribes. It's more like, this is my hunting ground. You can't come over here and take my animals. I won't go over there and take your animals. But we're going to live here next to each other and everything's cool. So no, they don't migrate. They do have trade routes where they trade products. Like, every once in a while, down where I showed you all the stuff on the creek bed and where the last petrified track was that I showed you, that group actually trades for crab a couple times a year, and I'll find fresh, fresh crab shells from the coast there. So yeah, it's 60 miles away. How did crab get here? This saltwater crab, if somebody didn't bring it here by carrying it or driving it here in a vehicle, and I know they don't drive, so it had to have been trade. And they do use markers like for fresh crab, for sea anemones, sponges, starfish. See, another kanji that I found is for oysters, so, and clams. So they do trade food items, and those food items sometimes are for special occasions, like when they get married, and they don't have just deer, they have a big feast, and they invite not only the immediate family members, but all of the local cousin families. So when Jen had her marriage celebration, though they did their own thing, they actually did have a celebration too with both families, his family and her family. And it's just like Native Americans when a new baby is born, back in the day in pioneer times. Not only would the immediate family celebrate that birth or that occasion, you would also have all of the aunts and uncles, you would have all the cousins come, and all of the second and third cousins come, which would be the people of your band. So you'd have your family group, your clan member group, which is all of your immediate cousins and aunts, uncles, that sort of thing. And then your second and third and fourth cousins are all of the bigger tribal members. And those bands of people may come also have big powwow and celebrations. So that sort of thing is the same kind of thing these people do. So, sorry, they don't migrate. And they don't live in caves, as far as I can tell. I haven't ever found any of them, other than the Ishka, and they don't live in a deep cave. They live in a shallow cave. It's a dugout cave, not anything that goes back more than like 4 or 5 feet into the soil. Why, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm glad you binge watch my videos. I hope you enjoy them. I appreciate that. Know which Bigfoot cryptids can clock predator types and which ones to avoid. Uh, Pretty much the ones with claws. So, your dog man, your Gugway. I know those guys are pretty violent. Can be. I haven't had any problem with even the Ichka or Janoskwa in this area. But then I gone into the bed system without. And now that she's passed, I don't think I'll mess with it because I don't know their language. She could speak it, and I don't know if I could get away with getting real close. I can get within a few 100 feet of that bed system, and I don't get a bad reaction. And if I had some decent photography equipment, I can probably get some decent footage when they're sitting in plain sight, because they don't seem to care. They heavily rely on their ability to sit quiet and not be noticed, and they use a lot of angle towards securing them from visual notice. So they'll sit up at about a 50-degree angle from you. So if you're focused here, you're not going to notice them up here. And they'll rely on that sort of thing a lot. Just like a lot of them will rely on the shadow or shade of a tree or bushes to just kind of snug into, and they think you can't see them. And most of the time you don't. And sometimes you won't see them until you look at your photo the second time and realize, oh wow, I took a picture of something I didn't realize was there. Because they'll stand really still, they'll sit really still. And that's something they utilize, I think, to hide. And that's also why I do my sits the way I do. Because then I'm kind of replicating their behavior, and to them proofing that I understand it. And that starts keying them to go, huh, okay, that human don't act like the rest of them. Maybe that one's worth being around. Yep, hard background. Oh yeah, every trail in this area that you go on, And it really doesn't matter which kind of trail, it's all going to be hard packed. Not worn down a whole lot. You might get a half inch or an inch difference, but you're going to have a lot of hard packed ground in this area. Yes, they do have a tendency to do a lot of breakage for trail markers. Like that one's probably just a marker saying, "Hey, I'm now sitting here on a regular," and letting whatever other family member or other cryptid that might be in the area let them know, "Oh no, this is my area. Go away." So those are things to think about. Well, Jen, she used to meditate around well, about this time of day, evening sun. She would sit and meditate, and she'd eat. She'd usually use a bird weir at that time of day, and she would sprinkle seed, get the birds to come close, and she'd at them and make them go bleh, stupid, and she'd pick them up, eat them. But during that time, when she was, doing her afternoon meal, she would sit, she would hum, she would sun watch or sun gaze, and as she kind of, I think, went into a conscious dream state, she'd appear to disappear. Like me in the sunlight, I seemed to blend into the light in the area. Well, her whole body did that. And it would appear as if she was clear, like you could see through her, but you really couldn't. She didn't look like she was there. Now you could sneak up on her and you could touch her, and she was physically there. It's just visually, her energy was matching the sun's radiation vibe. I think she was matching either tones or vibrations somehow with the surrounding light, and that was making her appear to disappear. So I think that's what they're actually doing. It's not a piece of technology. I think it is a practiced form of meditation that they utilize. Because when I asked her, I said, "Why can't I see you?" She'd say, "Well, I'm disappearing." And I asked her, "What does that mean?" She says, "Well, you think you're not there, so you're not there." I'm like, "Okay." So, it's got to be some sort of practice meditation. And on that note, when you think about the Tibetan monks and some of the Shaolin and the people who actually do a lot of meditation, some of them actually physically disappear and are physically not there until they're done meditating, and then they reappear. And monks witness this sort of thing all the time. It's like some novice meditators will levitate, and they'll levitate 3, 4 feet off the ground. And in fact, there is a story stating that the reason why temples are no longer open air temples is because some of the first novices floated off too high when they meditated, and when they would wake up from their meditation, they would fall back to earth and kill themselves by accident. So they started putting roofs on temples so you wouldn't meditate yourself into lower orbit. Oh yes, I can identify ones are around me, and it's usually by the tracking evidence I find. Sometimes I have to actually look for the droppings, or I have to be in the area enough to see one, and or have somebody tell me a location. Because that's the other thing I do. If you've got a cryptid in the area, you've seen one, you don't know what it is, or you want to know more about it, or it's on your property and it's giving you a problem, I usually go in and I'll either track them or I will find some way of communicating so that they can have a more relaxed situation. But 9 times out of 10, they aren't going to let you see them. You actually have to go through quite a long process, 6, 8 months to a year, for most of them to relax enough to get comfortable with you enough to be around you so that you could maybe even take pictures. So yes, they're identifiable by their footprints, by their behaviors, and by their look. and by their nests, where they sleep, how they sleep, what do they sleep in, how do they build their bed. Uh, that all tells you what's there. But you have to be familiar with what those bed systems look like and what those tree sets look like, or you're going to assume it's all Bigfoot and not separate creatures. For their laughter, you're positively smiling and enjoying, appreciating the nature of things. Awesome, Justin. Good, good, good. And you seem to be a very spiritual individual, so I think you would probably really groove on some of the unusual kind of spiritual things that these beings do. And hopefully I'll be able to find some of that stuff here soon and show you as well. Oh, that's a good point. Hearing. Well, their hearing is excellent. And I've had my hearing tested. And every time I go in to have tests done, I have to tell the guys not to worry about their equipment. It's not broken. Please don't recalibrate it. Because my hearing range, I can go down to 152 megahertz. And I can hear up into the 30,000 hertz cycles, which is far beyond normal human. So if I'm a half-breed, their hearing is probably much better than mine. I can hear the rustling of feathers on a small bird, for instance. I may not see the bird, but I can hear it fly by. And keep that in mind. You can't be quiet enough in these guys' areas for them not to notice you. And they smell, they can, if their ability to smell is like mine, I supposedly smell 10 times better than a dog, then they're going to smell you before they even hear you or see you. So I don't think that we can technically sneak up on them unless we are very good at what they do and how they move. Um, about Mount St. Helens, remember the old guy that stayed up there and didn't want to leave his house behind? Yeah, he's still there. They kind of have the same perspective. Uh, they won't leave their house, they won't leave their home. And that's part of the danger. They don't know how to evacuate in an emergency situation. So they die, unfortunately, with the rest of the animals. But then, it's also maybe part of their belief system that life is what it is. I don't know enough about that part of their beliefs, but that is a potential. And I do know that they don't have the same kinds or types of medicine. They're very rudimentary in their medicinal plant use and their mineral uses as medicines, but they do use them. It's just they aren't aware of certain things. They don't know how to, for instance, revive a person from drowning. And that's probably part of the reason why they have such a high mortality rate with the little ones, because they can't cure anything that requires an antibiotic, and they don't know how to bring back a heart attack victim, and they don't know how to save a drowning child. Excuse me, I need to drink water. Yeah, funny thing is what would it be like if we could actually interact with them more, like I did when I was a kid? How much could we learn, and how much could we impart to them? How much better would their lives be with a little bit of medicine? But then again, how much worse would their lives be with a lot of our intrusion? Especially if people don't see them as human beings. If they consider them an animal, then they're going to treat them like an animal. And that is the danger, because people don't remember that we are also animals. Um, we seem to think that because we can use tools that we're something special. And, to a degree we are, but we're not all that special. There have been plenty of other things on this planet before us, and probably be plenty of other things after us. I was wondering, oh, awesome, Lauren. Oh, good. I'm glad that you have that kind of activity near you. Well, bad pup, the Yaren uh, won't accept food items from me, but the Guan upstream from them do. And the things I've been able to give them, and this is something I need to go up and document. I'm going to have to take a friend with me though to try to hold the camera for me because I'm going to try to get some footage of them doing their thing this time. So there's an area that I can go up to where there's approximately 16 to 20 of Guanch family members. And mid-afternoon, around the time they will, just before they like to meditate, so between 2 and 4 they eat a meal. It's kind of their final meal of the day. And then they'll meditate after that, or they will nap. So I know of a location where I can very easily trade or give them food, and they've set up a marker for me to put it on. So they will call, they will let me know when then they are in the area, and that is one of those, ground-born hooting owls. Sorry, owls don't sit on the ground. They don't like that, and they don't hoot when they catch something. In fact, they typically catch it and leave. So they'll make a call to let me know, hey, we're here. So watermelon is a hit with them. Apples, pears. I've taken up meat like dried meat, fish. I've also gone up with like canned uh, fish products like you know not salmon but the little sardines. They'll take sardines. Cheeses, they'll also take cheeses. So they'll signal me, and then I go down maybe 50 feet to where the rock is that I'm supposed to put the food on, and I will leave a big pile of food. I come back up, because my agreements I'm not supposed to look at them. And they'll pass within 40 feet on either side of the site, and they go down into the creek bed, and you can hear them coming across the creek from the other side. They'll gather up all the food, and this only takes a few minutes, and then they disappear. You'll go right back down. There won't be a crumb left. And I've done this for a few years now, and they've given me other things. They brought me a knife once as a trade item, and they brought me a pair of glasses of some kind that were really nice, high-end, adjustable sunglasses. But I figured they probably want to keep those, so I didn't take that item. And the knife I took, I've sharpened it, and I put a sheath on it, and put a nice wrap on the handle. So I'm going to take the knife back up here soon and give it back to the individual that traded it to me, see if he'll take it back. I would suspect that they could see energy. If they can see the infrared or blue light off a camera, I'm pretty sure they can probably see an aura, especially with the amount of meditation that some of these people do. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they could see an aura. And I know that some of them can dream walk, meaning that they can communicate with you in dreams. They can come to you in dreams. A lot of people have had that experience, as have I. And thankfully, sometimes that's saved me from a dangerous situation, actually. Sorry, it's a little chilly, and wind's kicking up in this area. There we go. So let me get to a few more questions. Oh gosh, my shoulder is cramping. I have damaged back, and every once in a while, my arm will cramp up. Lots of fun. So let me look at questions here. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to get a little muffled sounding. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Bonnie, I do have cryptids in my lineage. My native grandmother, Owaisa, was actually the product, supposedly, of a human woman and a Bigfoot of some kind. So yeah, I've got a few odd anomalies genetically. Like I have half a digestive tract, I have a working appendix, I've got unusual hearing, sight, voice, smell. I'm stronger than normal, and most people in my family live in excess of 100 years, and usually in very good health. We don't typically have much in the way of any kind of health issues, and a lot of us don't even get sick. I mean, I think the last time I had flu was 4 or 5 years ago. You know, everybody's going into flu season now, freaking out, and I'm like, well, I'm not really worried about it. Um, so you know, there's that, and then both uh, both my grandmother and my mother and I uh, are all very strong. Like, I don't want to tell you this, but I can actually push a pretty heavy vehicle by myself because I can roll around about 4,000 pounds. My uncle, he was also part of that family line. My mother's brother, he could pick up the front end of a VW van with one arm. Like, he could pick it up 20, 30 inches off the ground, like he was doing pull-ups. So you could put a jack under it. He never carried a jack with his vehicles. He just picked the front of the vehicle up if he needed to put a jack under it and have his friend slide the jack under. So there's that. And that guy could actually hit. He finally grew to like 6'8", and he could punch hard enough that he could knock a charging bull out. Used to be he and his friend's drinking game. Another guy that was giant like him. They'd get schnockered and they'd go punch bulls out, hit him in the head, knock him out, stumble them to their knees. But then again, you know, my uncle could rip a car apart. In fact, the jaws of life are designed after him because during his life he saved 16 people from car accidents by either picking the vehicle up off of them or tearing the vehicle apart to get them out. And when he finally got so old and arthritic down there in Sacramento, the fire department that had always called him in the event that they could not get somebody out of a vehicle asked for him to go through studies so that they could build a fake replica to match what he could do physically. So if you look into that, that man's name is Robert Pollock. That was my uncle, and that's who the Jaws of Life were designed after. It was his physical strength that they used, and that thing has to keep up with what he did, and that was after he was arthritic. They didn't have an accurate measurement of what he really could do, because he was younger. He could do some pretty wild stuff. Well, a lot of this I've learned either because you know I've gone through the whole testing process. Like I ended up with an eye infection at one point in time and found out that I have the same eyes as an animal has. You know, it's got the little uh, tappeta piece in the back, opens up, my eyes can glow red. But that's only under extreme cases, like if I've been in an accident, my eyes will glow red. If somebody's tried to blow my head off, my eyes will glow red. If somebody puts a knife to my throat, high adrenaline, my eyes will glow red. It's saved me a lot of times, but it's also freaked people out a lot. And science and biology claims that there are plenty of humans that have that little adaptation left over in the eyeball. It's never functional, but in me, it's functional. And I know of at least one other native individual in this area that also has functional tapaluna. So there are that sort of adaptations to think about as well. So you can go online, you can do hearing tests on yourself through your phone. It'll give you your perspective, your basically what a human can hear, and then you can also find tests that go above and below that. That's a way you can test your own hearing and have a relatively accurate read. Visually, though, you can also go in and do like color tests, which is really bizarre because I found out even though I'm female and this shouldn't be happening, I'm slightly colorblind in the brown spectrum of colors. But I have the ability to see far more colors than other people. And there are actually a few artists in the world that see a multitude more colors than the average person. So they're probably also related to cryptids and don't know it, be it they, related to a Neanderthal or a Denisovans or some other critter out there, or maybe even a Bigfoot, who knows. So there's quite a bit of testing that you can do online. I mean, you can't do that sort of thing with a scent, or taste, or your vocal cords per se, but eyes and ears you can definitely test online for, and get an understanding of what is the normal human perspective and what's outside of those ranges. And then just looking into people that are a little different that way, because there are several people around the world that do have some different visual and auditory abilities. I don't know about the East Coast. I know a lot about the West Coast cryptids. Um, I know that grandmother said that pretty much everything is the same all over everywhere, except back east you probably have more unusual cryptids. Like some of the stories that she talked about were some very unusual looking things, like that you wouldn't even expect was a cryptid. The flying horse, but it's not a Pegasus. She said it was a goat that walked upright, but it was a flying horse. I'm assuming that's something like what you find up there in upper state New York. And she also talked about flying heads that had no bodies that were supposedly back east somewhere. I don't know if that's true. I know that there is a native story about a tribe that cursed land that had flying heads, but she seemed to think that they were a cryptid of some sort, a Bigfoot kind of thing, but not, just another leftover life form. Um, and then there are the Mothmen over there. So you guys have a bit more of a mix of stuff than it seems to be here. Now, up in Washington, there are some flying cryptids that look like humanoids. I don't know if you guys have them back east, and they're not bats. They don't have wings. They just look like a levitating human. Could be a piece of tech, but, I think there are stories back into the Middle Ages about flying people. So there's that cryptid, and I don't know if that's some sort of a vampire or ethereal thing or what it is. Uh, Grandmother didn't have too many stories about him other than that she said. So I would say look into your local myths and your native indigenous cultures to see what kind of myths they had and what they recorded in their areas. It would give you a better idea than I can give you, because everything I know is pretty much connected to the West Coast. Hey, Jenny. You know, I occasionally watch like the Missing 411 stuff, and some of it, yeah, it might be cryptid, but some of it I think is bad behavior on humans' part. But there are plenty of old stories, native stories, and there are plenty of pioneer stories about people disappearing and, going missing and disappearing in certain areas. So I wouldn't put it past it, that there is some sort of, if it's not a cannibalistic human, a cannibalistic cryptid, or, something that prefers human meat to deer meat. But exactly what those are, until I could actually physically track it myself, I'm not going to make a judgment on it unless there was an eyewitness that said, oh yeah, that dog man did this. And the reason why is because it's far too conjecturish. I know I deal a lot in the possibilities of, but I would rather be 100% positive as to what I'm saying on those regards than to blame a particular being and that blame be falsely placed and then maybe an extermination happen of them. I don't want to see that ever. So I would like to actually have more information on that sort of thing and understand it better. But like I said, I have watched some of the, you know, Missing 411 and the little boy who went missing, and all that was found was like the top of his skull and his clothing. I would say that was actually human and not a cryptid. And the reason why I would say that is because his shirt was taken off normal, but his pants were peeled off backwards. That's suggestive. And then the way the skull top was, just the top, to me it looked like there was some slight crushing to the back of that crest piece that was left of his skull. My guess is somebody popped him, like hit him with something. And the reason why I say that is because my mother, when she was 2, suffered a horrible accident. She fell off of this wooden swing and didn't realize not to stand up because the swing was still coming back, and it was a 2-inch thick hardwood plank that was, 18 inches wide and 22 inches long, about 15 pounds of material. Smacked her in the skull and broke 73% of her skull almost all the way around the top of it. Started here and ended there. So that individual child had to have been hit with something that knocked the top of his skull off. So either whatever it was had to have hands for one. And I have never seen foraging evidence, even in dogman territory, that resembles that. Dogmen, from what I gather so far, eat a lot of small things, eat rodents. They don't take big game. So I don't think it would be a dog person. Now, it could be something else. I don't know what, because without being able to see the tracking evidence in the area, I'm not going to play the guessing game on that. Awesome. Yeah, I got kudos in one of my college courses. I was taking an extra credit course in theater, and part of the things that we had to do was create a color scale. And I ended up creating a color scale of over 300 different colors that were all tone matched really well. In fact, so well that my teacher said, "Hey, you want a job in Hollywood?" I said, "No, I don't, but thank you." So yeah, some people can very definitely pinpoint a color. And then you've got individuals, like I have a friend who only has one color cone type, and he probably only has like 2 or 3 of those color cones. He can see a color like, kind of like mustard yellow, which is his favorite color because it's the only color he can see. The rest of everything that he sees is all black and white. He doesn't have any color perception other than black and white. And my mother went to high school with a boy that only had, that same kind of black and white vision, except it was all in the blue spectrum. Everything was a tone of blue for him. So there are also individuals who are born with different eye structures that suggest that, there's probably the opposite somewhere in our genetics, or in maybe even the cryptid's genetics, if we are as closely related as I suspect that we are. Well, Jen was actually her name. Her species was OMA. And I'm not sure, that's the one thing my family didn't tell me. When Awaisa's father came around, there's stories about them and her mother courting, the cryptid man and her mother courting, but he was considered a Thunderbird tribal member. So I don't know which one. I don't know what cryptid I'm related to. I don't know if I'm related to a Guan, an OMA. I don't know. And that's actually part of my personal quest, is trying to figure out what my family might have crossbred with. Because I do have some oddities. Like, I can't use a lot of medications. They don't work on me, period. Or they work too flippin' well. Like, I can't go through surgery. I die from the anesthesia. I've died twice. I don't really feel like doing it again. It sucks. Yes, peanut butter sandwiches. And I had one that really liked Butterfinger candy bars. So sweets occasionally will be a real hit with them. Uh, that's always a good one to utilize. Peanut butter in particular seems to be a good one. But choo- pick and choose what you think they like, or maybe take stuff from the area and kind of figure out what they might like. Because I've tried things like sweet potatoes or oranges, and they don't seem to really like sweet potatoes, like yams, or oranges, but they'll take apples and they'll take ham. So it just kind of depends. I think it's like us, they're going to like some things more and like some things less. All right, Jay, you have a good one. I'm glad that you made it too, Jenny. Hey, Denny. I think there are sorcerers, shapeshifters. They can do whatever they want. Magic. What's your opinion? Well, I do know that they do have medicine people. And some of those medicine people are very skilled. Uh, but I think we're more the shapeshifter individuals than they are. I haven't had any experiences with them shapeshifting, for instance. I have had experiences with them disappearing in front of me, or practicing disappearing. So let me tell you a little story. When I was up in Washington, I had been trying to track Oma female and her child. And they would go down into this funny little secluded bowl area off like a finger point. So it was very secluded. It was maybe 60 feet across, and it was a big half round bowl. A little tiny stream ran through it, kind of a hairpin shape. And then this finger of land, ridgeline came down into the area. And it wasn't a very tall ridgeline. It was only 30, 40 feet in height. So everything was kind of miniaturized in the area. It was like great big scenery, but a little tiny spot. And initially I had uh, been attracted to the area because there was an odd acting critter. There was a creature in the area that was not acting like a normal wild animal, and it was a small marten. So martens are relative to the mink, and they have very specific behaviors and foraging patterns that they follow. Well, this particular marten wasn't following his normal foraging pattern, so I figured he was being fed by something. And it was actually me following the marten, and it's how I found the young ones and the mom doing their thing. I'd seen them in the area, and I already discovered the young one. I'd already startled the young one, but I couldn't figure out where they were sitting. I'd been going back and forth and around this little bowl area and not down into it until I followed the marten in. So that very first time, I startled the pair of them, the mother and the child, and the baby was a few months old, maybe a year at the most, because it was still pretty small. It was about 2 foot in height, maybe 2.5 feet. And then I got to a point where I was able to sneak into the area and they wouldn't hear me, and I could finally actually watch what was going on, because I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Because I would see the baby crawl up this small little sapling tree that was maybe 4 inches in diameter, and then I would see the leaves rustling as something fell out of the tree, but I couldn't see what was falling. It looked kind of like a shimmer, but nothing, no figure. So it was really confusing to me. What am I seeing? So I finally was able to get in there and watch it long enough to see what was, and understand. I got close enough I could see the physical activity, because I was like maybe 10 feet above them. But I didn't get to see it more than a couple times before they noticed me, and they both buggered off underneath the bushes on the other side of the creek, and they were gone. So what I watched was Mama Oma with her baby, and he would be visible and give her a hug, and then he would kind of and disappear. And once he'd done that a couple times, she'd have him go up the tree. So he'd physically climb up the tree. You could see him climb. And then he'd do his little hum, or he'd practice it without a hum, which is, I think, what he was trying to do, is get the process down without making any sound. And then he'd jump down out of the tree back into her arms. And somehow she could still see him. I couldn't. So there's another answer as to how their eyes might function even better than mine. But I'm pretty sure everything that they're doing is based in like energy and meditation. And I think it is, maybe some of them are born with it, but I think a lot of it is taught and it's learned. And that's potentially behavior we can learn, actually, when you think about it. If you learn to meditate. I don't know what orbs are. We had one incident in my hometown, but of orbs, and I don't think they're from here. If I think they're some sort of other being from somewhere else, maybe, or maybe they're just a life form that we don't understand yet, because they do seem to move with some sort of intention, and they can move objects, so that makes me wonder what they are. I don't think they have any connection though to Bigfoot, because I've never seen orbs in Bigfoot territories. You have a head injury, Sky? Uh, they do suck. They can screw up your motor functions for one. Okay, what a few other questions here. Hey, Starseed, I've heard about the flying heads, but you are the only the second person I've ever heard mention them being in the woods. Yeah, my native grandmother had stories about them. She claimed that the flying heads would eat you if you were in the wrong woods. And that might also be another factor with the 411 thing, because a lot of the 411 stuff, the individual just is gone. There are no tracks. To me, that says something is picking them up out of the air, be it a large bird, predator of some kind. Because if a cougar picks you up, you're going to find tracks. If a human picks you up, you're going to find tracks. If Bigfoot picks you up, you're probably going to find some sort of movement evidence or tracks. And the fact that a lot of these kids that go missing and people that go missing, it's more like they're getting picked up off the ground and flown away. To me, there's just not enough ground evidence to suggest that they're being carried away in a lot of cases. It seems like, and then the fact that they show up in higher locations than where they disappeared in. that's also another indication that whatever picked them up potentially is a flying creature of some kind. So I think that might discount things like Bigfoot, but it could put in other kinds of cryptids that are flying creatures as a possibility. And besides, see the Ronak. If any of you are familiar with the Ronak from, where are they? Borneo, New Guinea, is flying dinosaur, pterodactyl. There's been sightings of them since World War II and before. The locals describe them as a pterodactyl. And the last individual in that area to be eaten by a pterodactyl in front of the village, I think it was in like 1978 or 79. Individual was picked up out of their field while working in the field, and the pterodactyl sat down in a tree next to the village and ate him in front of the rest of the village. So, if that news story is true, mind you, there was also a military man during World War II that was attacked by pterodactyls and was made a paraplegic because it tried to grab him from behind and pick him up and fly off with him. Well, my dad got to meet that individual, and my father went into the cave system where the pterodactyls were, and dang near didn't make it out. But you said they were real, and I know that the individual in the military did a piece for Monster Quest about his injuries that he sustained during World War II in the South Pacific, pterodactyl attack. So, at that point, you know that military things are an actuality, because I'm sure they put that in their little black book. Yes, finally made it to 1,000 subscribers. Yay! Now I've got about 1,400 more hours of airtime before I can actually start doing stuff. I've got to see yet if I can, start posting up my. I think I've got another month waiting period or something. God, I hate hoops. I'm so sorry. I was hoping that, I could do my lives and everybody would have access to them, but, it's this little waiting game kind of thing. I gotta earn my way, I guess, or something. So I will hopefully be able to put them up publicly soon. That would be really nice. There is also, Jenny, some suggestion of that. Like what was it? Rio de Janeiro, I think there was a film a few years ago, video of individual, I think it was a child on a bicycle riding down an alleyway, and an alien tried to reach through a portal and grab the kid off the bicycle, and it's all filmed on a security camera. So, there's also that sort of thing that might be going on. I think portals are probably more attached to off-worlder critters, not us here, or the things that have, progenited from here. I'm pretty sure that the portal aspect of this might be, tech-oriented, not so much with the Bigfoot. And I do know that a lot of the Skookum in particular in this area do not like unusual lights in the sky. They don't like unusual sounds. And there are a few incidences of that sort of thing in this area. Certain hillsides have unusual sounds, mechanical sounds, humming that shouldn't be there, and red or orange lights that shouldn't be there because there's literally no light there, but you'll see the aura of light over a hillside when you hear the humming. And to me, that all suggests some sort of technology. Because there is so much military activity here in this area, I wouldn't doubt that it's connected to something like that. There's way too much suggestion of that anyway when you start looking at things. And yeah, we actually did have native stories. My grandmother told me quite a few native stories about the two types of thunderbirds. One of them is a feathered thunderbird. It looks very much like a golden eagle, except that it has an orange beak and feet instead of the yellow, like bald eagles and golden eagles both have yellow feet, but the golden eagle has a black beak, whereas I think the other eagle has a yellow. But grandmother spoke about a third type of eagle here in the United States. It was larger. She said they had an average 9 to 12 foot wingspan. They had orange feet and orange beak, and that they had been known to be able to pick up small people, like children. Uh, so there's that potential. And I have seen feathers from a bird like that on reservation lands. Medicine people have them sometimes. And the feathers, it's massive. It's the size of the quill is the size of your thumb, bare minimum. The feather overall is anywhere between 3.5, 4 feet, sometimes 5 feet in length. I've seen a couple of them. They're usually dark blue-ish in color. Some of them age out though. The older they get, the darker they get, so they'll get almost brown blue, a very funny color tone. And the top of the feather will be more brown, then the bottom side will be more blue. And they do have the vein down the center of the feather like an eagle, so I know it is from an eagle of some type. It's way bigger a feather than would be off of a normal eagle. Because it's also 8-10 inches across. One of them was almost a foot across and was very old and had been collected over 200 years ago and kept in that family line for a very long time. So there are plenty of stories about that form of thunderbird eagle within the native cultures, even here in the Northwest. And then grandmother's more archaic stories, like from 30,000 years ago during the Ice Age. She claimed that there were still stories about, pterodactyls as thunderbirds, another concept of them. And that they, had leathery wings and flew very much like a glider bat. So they don't evidently flap their wings quite as much as a bat, but they do have a tendency to have the ability to glide, kind of like, she said they would glide kind of like and their flying pattern was very much like a vulture's. And that was all from family lore, the descriptions of those kinds of creatures. And there are also stories in the Mideast of giant birds. What do they call them? The Arabian Nights actually talks about them. And they were supposed to have, I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of them are. But they had reportedly 12 to 15 foot wingspan, and they were able to pick people up and carry them off. And they were actually big enough supposedly to pick up humanoids, like adults. So, with a bigger bird like that, or especially if they're, eagle or vulture, because some of those critters can pick up more weight than other birds can. Like the Egyptian vulture, for instance. Egyptian vulture is a crested vulture, is not a bald vulture. And its primary food source are ostrich eggs. And they will pick up rocks to break the ostrich eggs with, and they can actually pick up 10 times their own body weight. They're the only bird in the world that can. So if you're dealing with a cryptid bird that has a potential like that, I could see them picking up a small cow and flying off with it. Pterodactyl, petrodactyl. Actually, pterodactyls and petrodactyls are two different things. I'm actually talking about a petrodactyl, not a pterodactyl. You see, one of them is a wing walker and the other one isn't. Might want to look the difference up. Not to be an ass, but, pterodactyls and petrodactyls are two different critters. They are cousin species, and they are in the same time periods for the most part. But they do have slightly different physique. And one of them had a suggestion of body, what do you call it? Body hair, but it's not hair. It's single cell feathers all over its body. I think that was the petrodactyl, not the pterodactyl. The pterodactyl is a smaller version, and they were completely unfeathered, supposedly. At least we found nothing specimen-wise in the ground petrified that suggests that, but we have that with petrodactyls, which are the larger of the species. Oh yeah, Danny. I had one juvenile do that to me. I had gone into the bed system of a Guan family up in Washington, and one of the juveniles had gotten very familiar with me and very curious about me, and he would sit me into the bed system, and I'd noticed him sitting there, and he was usually sitting. I hear him eat, but I couldn't see him. And then one day, he decided to have my lunch there, and I spent a little extra time there. And next thing I know, he's decided he's going to show himself and then disappear when anybody walked by. So he'd be there, I look over, okay, you're there, playing Cheshire Cat with me, then he disappeared. I'm like, alright, so that evidently is some sort of behavior aptitude, and you've got a skill there that I'm realizing is real. So there's that sort of thing that can potentially happen too. I'm just wanting to try to check my time. I gotta get to work here soon. Oh my gosh, I better get. I am almost late. It's 5:30. Oh my god. I gotta be to work in 5 minutes. Thank god I'm so close. Anyway, guys, I'm so sorry. I got to yammering way too long. I am definitely going to have to take an out right now. I've got to drive to work. And I will see you on Saturday's cast. Sorry I didn't get to more questions. And I will try to make sure that you got a good long live on Saturday as well and a good topic. And then, like I said, I'm going to have to switch to Fridays only for a time until I can get back into a normal schedule. I've got too many things pulling on my life at this point, and I've got way too much to do. And I'm going to have to back down a little bit on this, but I still will make sure that you've got some information coming your way at all times. You guys have a great one. See you guys later. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you all. But I gotta scoot. I gotta go to work. Bye bye.